using this to speak, if that's okay. So yeah, finishing up like around 7:30 at night. Probably with questions. So if you want to do 15 to 20 questions, Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us again. Today we are at week 8, the final session of the School of Climate Change this term, and we are delighted to have Ayesha Tandon to speak to us from Carbon Brief, an award-winning journalism website specializing in science and policy of climate change. Ayesha was awarded the 2022 European Geosciences Union Science Journalism Fellowship and the 2023 Royal Meteorological Society's Emerging Communicator Award. She's spoken at previous schools of climate change, and we are delighted to welcome her back today. So please join me in welcoming Ayesha Tandon.
Thank you so much. All right, guys, I'm going to apologize to start with. I have a bit of a cold, so my voice is a bit grim today, but I'm going to do my best. So first off, very important question. Who has ever watched So You Think You Can Dance? Anyone? Okay, just me. So the premise of the show basically is they get these professional dancers to come in and they have to learn to dance a different style. So they'll have like a hip hop dancer doing ballet or a jazz dancer doing tap or something. I used to love that show. I don't know if it's still running, but the reason I bring it up is it's quite relevant for what I want to talk about today, which is that all of you have been spending the past, 7 or 8 weeks learning a lot of really cool stuff about climate change, hopefully. And what I want to teach you all about is how to communicate that. And the really important thing is that all of you are probably specialists at communicating in one particular style to one particular audience. I'm guessing a lot of you are academics or students, and so you're used to communicating in a very sort of academic context. And so what I'm hoping that I can teach you today is how to take that and use those same skills, use that same foundation, but kind of change it so that you can communicate to a slightly different audience. Yeah, so that's why I think this is relevant. But if you want a slightly more professional title, then you can go with this one. All right, so first off, why listen to me on this topic? Why am I any good at teaching you how to communicate? Well, my career has taken me through a few different institutions. So I started off at the University of Exeter. So that's where I did my undergraduate degree, my master's degree. That's where I learned how to speak the language of science, how to read papers, how to talk at conferences, all of that very academic and formal stuff. I then went on to work at the UK Met Office for a bit, and there I was in a position called, well, my job title was Climate Science Communicator, but the team I was in was called the Knowledge Integration Team, and we kind of sat between the scientists and the policymakers and the general public and the internal facing communications team, and we all had different backgrounds and skill sets, and basically our job was to translate and communicate this work between all the different teams. And so that was kind of my first introduction into the idea that academics have a very specific way of communicating and maybe not everybody else communicates in that same way. And then I moved on to working at Carbon Brief, which is where I work now. We're a climate change journalism company, and our audience is mainly like policymakers and journalists and scientists, people with a background in climate change. It's not like BBC News where we're communicating to everybody. We still have quite a specific educated target audience, but again, a different audience. So just to give you a little bit more detail into each of those different places that I've worked, a bit more on what I did. So at Exeter, I obviously, as I said, was a student, bachelor's, master's, a lot of work doing like research, writing papers. I mean, I didn't write any papers that got published, but I wrote a lot of things that I thought at the time were papers. I've now realized maybe they weren't quite as good as real papers, but I spent a lot of time learning how to write academically. I spent a lot of time going to conferences. I was very keen back in the day. And so I went to any sort of free conference that I could find. I saw other people presenting their work, did a lot of posters, academic posters, which at the time was like the most creative thing I could think to do. But then I also really enjoyed writing. And so I worked at Expose, which is the student newspaper, and the undergraduate STEM journal. And Expose was kind of my first chance to think about writing for a general public audience. So I was in the science team there. I will say in the whole of the student newspaper, everybody was an English student. There were maybe 2 philosophy students, and then the science team was like me and one other engineering guy, and we were the only people who didn't have a background in something very writing based, and so it was being plunged into a completely different world. And when we would write pieces and submit them to editors, they would generally not understand what the hell the topic was, and we would spend a lot of time rewriting things. And that was kind of my first experience of that, and that taught me a lot. During my time at the University of Exeter, I also realized that maybe I was never meant to be a scientist. I spent, 3 years doing internships in nanotechnology, which was what I thought I was going to end up doing. I thought that was going to be my future career. And I will say that the people I was working with were fantastic, such a good team. And even with that team, I realized that this is not what I wanted to do. Science, like straight science for the sake of science, was not going to be my thing. I was much more interested in its communication and how it could be applied and like sharing that knowledge with the rest of the world. And so that's when I moved on to the UK Met Office. And so I worked there as an intern first. So that picture was me and all of the other interns for the year I was there. I think that was 2019. And that's where I first sort of started learning about visual mediums. So I made a couple of little infographics, which I see are very fuzzy now. You probably can't tell what they are, but I was very proud of these little circle things that I used to do back in the day. And so the main thing that I used to do at the Met Office was take academic papers and write summaries of them for the government. So most, well, okay, I have no idea, but I'm going to assume that most government officials don't have a background in science. They have a background in like PPE or something. And so we had to take these papers and try to make them digestible for a government reader. And so most of it was taking a paper and like writing a one-page summary. And this was the very first experience I had of like kind of flipping the order of scientific papers. Like when you write a scientific paper, there's a very specific format, right? Like introduction, methods, results, conclusion. When you're writing a summary for a government audience, you want to lead with like that results and conclusion and why this is important section. It's almost like taking the whole paper and flipping it on its head. And so we would have to squish the whole paper into one page. And I would say half of that page was about like why this should matter for you, Mr. Government person, like why climate change is important for you. It wasn't even about the specifics of the paper. And that meant that a lot of the details, the fine nitty gritty stuff of the paper would get lost, which I used to think was a real shame. But I was learning basically what level of granularity different people want. And a minister is not going to have time to read the whole methodology section of a paper, right? They just want the top level findings. If they really, really want to read the methodology section of the paper, they'll get someone else to do it for them and summarize. They're not going to read that themselves. So that's a lot of what I did, these government briefings and summaries. I also did a lot of podcasts, interviews, presentations, like talking to general public, talking to students, talking to our internal communications team, for example. So like when I made an infographic, I didn't make the infographic. I sketched out an idea and then I took it to the visuals team and I said, can you make this infographic? And they obviously had to understand what the hell I was talking about for that to work. So yeah, a lot of communication with other people in the Met Office team who had no background in science. I learned things like if you say the word radiation to someone who doesn't have a background in science, that's immediately a very scary word that evokes images of like nuclear war and that kind of thing. And I was like, oh no, I'm just talking about the sun. I'm talking about like solar radiation. Like it's fine, it's safe. Please don't draw it in this big scary red color. Like this is the good thing. Like little things like that. And then writing content for the website, which I'm going to come back to. I'm not going to talk about that too much now. Then Carbon Brief. So I'm the science correspondent at Carbon Brief. I've been there for over 5 years now, which is terrifying. Had my 5-year anniversary in November, which is really nice, but also very scary. So most of what I do at Carbon Brief is I take academic papers, things that are published in the big journals, things like Nature or Science, that kind of thing, and I write short pieces about them. So this is a thing that a lot of different newspapers do, like your standard BBC News, Guardian type newspapers. But when they do it, they'll usually write like 500 words and they'll interview one scientist maybe, and they won't talk a whole lot about the methodology. When I do it, I'll write maybe 1,500, 2,000 words. I'll talk to 4 or 5 different scientists. So our work really does kind of sit somewhere in between the sort of traditional news media and the actual academic paper. We kind of think of ourselves more as slow explanatory journalism, which is really good for me, actually. That's kind of coming from an academic background. That's kind of the right level of granularity for me. So I do get to talk about the method a little bit, but not have to like understand all of the statistics in the paper. So that's a lot of what I do. I also get to do a lot of big projects. So I worked on this thing called the Global South Climate Database, for example, which again, I'm going to talk about later, so I won't talk about that too much now. Again, a lot of conferences, a lot of presentations. So I go to the European Geosciences Union conference in Vienna every year, which is really cool. It's like a massive, massive conference. Hundreds and hundreds of people get to talk to lots of cool people. That's great. And then, yeah, again, podcasts, interviews, all that kind of thing. So I've never received any formal training on how to do types of communication, but hopefully you guys will agree that I've done a lot of these things. And so I've just picked up some stuff over the years. So I'd like everyone to get out a phone or a tablet or a laptop or something, because hopefully, yes, okay. So if everyone could go to slido.com and type in this code or scan the thing up top here. And I'd like to put a scenario to you guys, which is that you are all presumably experts in some field, maybe related to climate change, maybe not. I'd like you to imagine that you've got an email into your inbox that says, hey, I would like you to come and give a presentation tomorrow about your work. That's the whole email. You're going to reply, and I hope you're going to ask some questions. Like, well, first of all, like logistical stuff. Where do I need to go? What time do I need to be there? But also, I'm hoping that you want to know a bit more about your audience, about who you're presenting to. So what kind of things would you want to know about your audience in order to tailor your presentation and make it like the most effective that it can be? And while you guys are typing those things in, I'm going to tell you some of the assumptions that I made about you guys when I was coming here. So I was assuming that a lot of you guys are students. And so you're kind of like in your early 20s. I'm assuming, yeah, okay, age, perfect. I'm assuming that you all believe in climate change, that I don't have to convince any of you about that. I'm assuming you all think climate change is real and it's an issue. Maybe that says something about your political beliefs. Maybe I'm assuming you're all a bit more left-wing, liberal. Maybe that's not true. I don't know, but this is my assumption. I'm assuming academic background, absolutely. I'm assuming that you all have a fairly good knowledge of the world of academia, that maybe you're all university educated. And so the language I use can suit that. Yep, you're hitting a lot of them already. Languages, yeah, I'm assuming English is all your first language, or that you're all fluent enough in English that I can speak in English and you'll understand me. I'm assuming there are no disability needs, like that you can all hear me, that you can all see me. I haven't been told that that's not the case for any of you, so I'm assuming that's true. Field background, reasons for talk. Someone's put the Slido number in there. Okay, I think this is probably all the stuff. Nationality, level of knowledge, familiarity with climate change. Yeah, okay, I think this is all the stuff. Geographical location. Oh yeah, so for this one, so this is the second time I've given this talk. Last time it was just in person, it was just people in the room, and it wasn't being recorded. This time it's being recorded, so I'm assuming also that all of the things I've said about you guys who are in the room and I can see all of you, like I can see that you can all see me and hear me and that kind of thing. But I'm also assuming that everybody online can also see me and hear me and is following along and all that stuff. So maybe some more assumptions to be made about my online audience, but yeah, cool. Okay, we're going to play a game. So on the far left over here, it's a paper that was published a few years ago about safe and just Earth system boundaries. I don't know if any of you have heard of this paper. It was a study which was looking at it defined like a set of boundaries, and it said that if we stay within these boundaries, the Earth system will be safe. So it was stuff like fresh water and like that kind of thing, ecosystem stuff, climate stuff, pollution stuff. And it defined a set of boundaries for each of them. And it said if we stay within these boundaries, we'll be safe. And if we don't, if we breach them, then we won't be safe. That's a very simplified version, but that's kind of what the paper said. So the original paper's on the far left. My write-up of the study is in the middle there. And then the Guardian's coverage of the study is on the right over here. So I'd like you all to just take a minute to look at these three, because in a second I'm going to put up another Slido and I'm going to ask you what the differences are, that you see in the text and the images and the presentation, all of that stuff. So take a minute, have a think. I'm going to have some water and then I'm going to put the Slido up and we're going to play a spot the difference game between these three. move on to that. Okay. I'll go back to that. I'll toggle between the two a little bit so that you can have another look in a sec. But please, on your little Slido, what differences did you see between those 3 different types of coverage? And you can like chat to each other as well if you want. Like, yeah. Okay, see a lot of you pulling out the word contested. We spent a lot of time workshopping that headline. So I'm glad that you're all noticing the contested there, because that was a very big thing. Yeah, the pictures, definitely the headline. I'm going to toggle back to it again in case any of you want another look. I think you're covering most of the things. I noticed someone said hyperlinks. Yeah, Carbon Brief puts a lot of hyperlinks. I don't think many other publications would have like 4 hyperlinks in one sentence. Yeah, we do that a lot. Let's toggle back again. Yeah, audience, style of writing, generalizations, difficulty of language, native stories. Can I ask you put that? I'm interested in what that, or maybe it wasn't someone in the room. Never mind. And someone's put the Slido number again. The tone, some rely on doomerism. Okay, yeah, I think we've got all of them, but let's just go through them so I can make sure that everyone's got all of them. So first up, starting on the left, no images. We're assuming that people who click on this paper in the journal Nature don't need to be drawn in by images, right? Like they've gone specifically to this place to find this piece of work. They don't need to be pulled in by a picture of the Earth. One thing that I'm not sure if anyone got was the author list. So in the actual paper, there's a list of all the scientists because scientists care about that. Nobody else in the real world hugely cares about the scientists because they don't know any of them. Like the general public does not know who any of these people are. So, but for me, I'll look it up and like, ooh, Rockstrom was on this paper. That's interesting. Lenton was on this paper. David Abura was on this paper. Like, that's really interesting. No one else. That doesn't mean anything to like most people. Yeah, that's a really good point too. The corresponding authors, I guess the general public isn't emailing scientists, but yeah, that's a really good point. And for me, that's like a really important one, obviously. Like one of the first places that I go when I'm looking for people to contact is I go to academic papers, like relevant academic papers, and I try to get the corresponding authors. So like, yeah, absolutely. In the first one, the one on the far left, we've got the numbers indicating the references. So that's a kind of academic papery style of references. For me, for my middle one, I've got links. And for this one over here on The Guardian, they actually don't have that many links because they want people to stay on their website. Again, images you guys got as well. For The Guardian, they've got the image of the Earth. If I put an image of the Earth every time I wrote something climatey, my entire page would just be pictures of the Earth. Like The Guardian can do that because they're talking to a general public audience and they like the level of narrowing down that they are doing is this is a climatey story, it's about the Earth. Everything I write is about the Earth. So I had to be a little bit more specific with my image. And because it's quite a broad concept, we had to be a little bit meta with it. You know, like how do you show a climate boundary? And there's a whole field of climate imagery that I'm not going to go into now. There's a really good book by Saffron O'Neill about it if anyone wants to look more into it. Yeah. And then a lot of you talked about the difficulty of the language. Yes, and we're going to come on to difficulty of language. We're going to spend a while on that in a minute, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I think you'll all agree that the language in the one on the far left is a bit more complex than the language in the one over here on the far right. Hopefully the language on mine is somewhere in the middle. What else? The way the text is broken up as well. I mean, this is on the far left, you've got one big block. It's broken up a bit more here. We'll leave it at that, but you guys get the idea. Is there anything else that you guys? Oh yeah, the tone, optimism, doomerism. Okay, so actually, that's a good point. Lots of people covered this study, and I just want to show you a few other people who covered the study. So, like again, World Economic Forum going with the picture of the Earth. I've already talked about the significance of that, but their focus is on like scientists have the answer, which is quite a specific framing that I don't think we would ever use, for example, but it can be quite effective. This was the Potsdam Institute's press release. So again, theirs is quite simple. Their focus is on that this was the first study to do XYZ because their focus is on promoting their institution, promoting their scientists, as much as promoting their findings. This one's interesting. So this was Fortune. It's quite evocative, I think. Mother Nature violated 7 boundaries. Even the picture, I think, is quite dramatic. A very deliberate choice, maybe. I'm going to go through these quite quickly. I put these two next to each other because I think it's just an interesting compare and contrast thing. The one on the left gives me kind of eco-futurism-y vibes, whereas the one on the right here clearly is focusing more on the impacts on people. It wants you to probably think this is someone somewhere in Africa who is suffering because of climate change. Maybe inequality is a big focus of this article, or maybe not. I'm not sure, but that's my assumption. Financial Times. Oh, okay. This one here is actually a comment piece from some of the people who wrote the original article. And so they're able to put a bit more of a opinion-y spin on it. Like they're not just saying the findings, they've said, we've reached these limits, how can we get back? So presumably they're going to suggest some ways we can get back. Guardian, Independent, Editorial. So again, this is more opinion-y vibes. Is that all? Okay, cool. So yeah, all of these are kind of to prime you for thinking about the different ways that we can communicate. And again, this isn't everything, but like hopefully just looking at these 3 different stories will show you a little bit that even if you don't think you're making choices, you are making choices. Everything that you choose to do, the images you pick, the language that you use, even if it's something quite automatic that you aren't thinking about, it is a very deliberate choice that you're making. And so maybe, yeah, think about it. So this is something that if I had to kind of give a masterclass and I had one thing I could teach scientists about how to communicate with the general public, it would be this: don't bury the lead. And it's kind of, it shouldn't really be a thing that you have to teach. I think I'm going to get in trouble for saying this. But I think academia kind of teaches people to communicate in quite an unnatural way. So like if you had a normal day where you got up and you went to work and like blah blah blah, and then you came home and your partner was like, "Hey honey, how are you doing?" And you were like, "Oh wow, this is everything I did," and you went through it like chronologically. I got up, I went to work, I had lunch, I did this, I did that. That's not how people tell stories. People jump to the big things. If something big happened in the day and you got back and your partner says, "Hey, how are you doing?" You'd be like, "Oh my God, I got a promotion," or I like whatever the big thing is. You're going to jump to the big thing. You're not going to go chronologically through your day until you get to the big thing and give it equal weighting to everything else that was in your day. But in academia, I think that's kind of the way people are taught to think sometimes. Like everything needs to be fair and you go through things in order and you start with your introduction and then you go to this and then you go to that and then the results happen at the end. This maybe other people would disagree with me, but I think it's not quite the way that people speak normally. And so in a research paper, that's the way you do it. You start with your introduction, then you go to your method, and the results, like the exciting bit, the big bit, that doesn't come until well, I'm going to try and stay away from the button. Does that mean everyone online didn't hear me for like the past few minutes? Cool. I'll go back to the introduction of this slide. Okay. So what we have here is the way that research papers are written. Introduction, then methods, then results, then discussion, usually. So I would like to know what people think the order would be if you were talking to a general public audience. So if you were giving an interview about this study, or you were like summarizing the findings to someone, which section would be first? So can I have a show of hands if you think the introduction would be first? What about the method? Results? Cool. And discussion? Yep. Okay, cool. Yes. For those of you online who could not see, most people raise their hands for results, which I think is the correct answer. So this isn't a thing that you have to do. This is my humble suggestion for how I would suggest you do it. I would say start with results. That's the most important thing. After that, I think you can judge it a little bit more based on the paper, but I would suggest that the introduction hit it. Is that why it's turning off? It's still going? Okay. I would suggest that after that you go for the introduction, because the introduction is where you give a bit more of that context. And I do think you have to have context. Like, grab people with the results, then give the context. Then I would say discussion, and then I would say method at the end. I'd say usually method goes at the end, because usually people, I'm afraid, don't really care about the method and like how you did the stuff that you did. They just want to know what you found. You can play a bit fast and loose with kind of the last few, but I would say results almost always go right up top. So just to put my money where my mouth is, this is my okay. I'm gonna really try not to press anything. Okay. Okay, how's that? Is that working? Testing, testing, yeah. Okay, awesome. Um, those of you online probably aren't going to play this game, but I'm going to say it one more time just in case. So I'm going to read the first block of text. Earth's life support systems have been so damaged that the planet is well outside the safe operating space for humanity, scientists have warned. So I want everyone to take a second, think in their head what score you would give that block of text based on this rubric here. And I know this is slightly cheaty of me because I haven't given you any information on how to calculate this. I'm just kind of curious what you guys think. Does everyone get a number in their head? When you have a number, raise your hand. I'm not going to call on you, but it's. Any hands up? All right. I'm going to start counting down from 100. When I hit your number, drop your hand, and we'll see if everybody has what everybody's idea is. I think this is a bit of group think here as well. So I'm going to start counting down. Drop your hand when I get to your number. So 100, 95, 90, starting to go, 85, 80. Ooh, a lot of hands down now. 75, 70. Stay strong if you think that you're not there yet. 65, 60, 55, 50. You've seen my presentation before. I know that. You and one other person were very close. So this, according to the flash reading ease score, is around a 55. So still fairly difficult to read, apparently. All right, second one. Almost all global thresholds for a safe and just planet have already been breached, including for the climate, ecosystems, and freshwater, according to new research. So I'm going to tell you guys all now that this is more difficult, according to the flash reading ease score. So everyone get a number on your head, and then hands up, please. And I'll start at 55 because it's more difficult. Okay, so 55, 50, 45, 40, 35. Hands are starting to go now. 30, 25, 20, 15. Okay. I think now maybe we're overcorrecting. I think a lot of you are kind of on the right ballpark, but yeah, so this is still considered difficult to read, which makes me a bit sad because I spent a really long time workshopping this opening line, but that's fine. Okay, last one. The stability and resilience of the Earth system and human well-being are inseparably linked, yet their interdependencies are generally under-recognized. Consequently, they are yeah. Okay, no problem. Okay, is that good? Okay. Um, okay, so how do we use easy words? Well, the English language is made up of stuff that we stole from other people, obviously, so, as with a lot of other stuff in this country. And so it turns out that different concepts often have different words associated with them. And so in this instance, there's often a Latin root and there's a Germanic root, two different words to describe the same concept. So would I be right in saying it's the Normans who came over and brought the Latin words, Anglo-Saxons who brought the Germanic words? I think that's right. The way. Often the Latin words are more fancy, and I kind of think of this as like if you can imagine saying them in a French accent, it's probably like a Latin word. If you can imagine someone saying it in a pub, it's probably a Germanic word. Not best rule of thumb, but like as an idea. And so, for example, instead of saying amicable, you could say friendly. Instead of saying finished, you could say end. Often there is a word that you can use in place of the word you're going to use. And so, again, maybe a little game. These are words that I think scientists often use that I don't think they need to use. Obviously, sometimes when you speak really specific with your language, don't oversimplify things when you don't need to oversimplify things. But these are words that I genuinely think you never ever need to use ever again. So if I told you that the Latin word was novel, the Germanic word would be new. If I said equitable, you would say, yeah, fair or just. If I said requirements, yep. Question or inquire would be, and victory, then this is a victory for climate change. Right. If any of you find a reason to not use the word on the right and to use the word on the left instead, tell me. No one has ever come back to me with one. Okay, so I think you never need to use those ones. But big old list of words if you want over here on Wikipedia. Again, it's not always a straight swap. I get that, but I do think a lot of the time you can use this, and it'll just make everything a bit easier. And I think you can also use this just in conversation in your day-to-day chats with your friends. I know a lot of academics who speak very a very sophisticated way, even when they're just like down the local pub, and like will explain their work in scientific concepts using these very long words because that's the way that they use these scientific concepts. And I think it's not always needed. Right, we're coming towards the end of the talk now. I want to share a few things I think might be helpful. But as I said, the company I work for is called Carbon Free. Obviously, I think they're really cool because I've been there for 5 years. And obviously, all of you are interested in climate-y stuff. So I just want to share a few resources from Carbon Free that I thought for some of you guys. So, starters, we have a lot of newsletters. There's kind of a move towards newsletters these days because social media seems to be dying / becoming a bit of a cesspool. And so people seem to be interested in getting news directly to their emails instead. So we do put a lot of time and effort into these newsletters. I think they're quite helpful. So the one on the far left is a daily email, like a daily news summary of everything that's happening in climate change. It is quite detailed. I write it a couple times a month. It takes a pretty long time. Worth to read, I think. But if you want something a little bit less in-depth, then Debrief is our weekly newsletter. Just like weekly summary of the news, top points that you need to know. Helpful, I think. That is our Food, Land and Nature offering that comes out once a fortnight. And the China briefing, if you are a China-specific person. Again, quite specific, but like for a subset of people, I think it's very, very interesting. I don't think there's a lot of other stuff out there like it. So all of these are free. You can just sign up to them. Cool. The other thing I want to share with you is the Global South Climate Database, which is a project that I worked on. And so because I've got you all captive here, I do want to talk about it just for a little bit because I think it is important and interesting. So academia in general, but especially climate change, has kind of a diversity problem. A lot of the research that's published on it is completely unknown for the north. So one of the first big projects I did in 2021 was I did some analysis on the lack of diversity in highly cited climate science literature. So I took the 100 most highly cited climate science papers that were published in a 5-year period, and I analysed all 1,300 authors manually of those papers. I found that 90% were from the global north, 3/4 were men, obviously, maybe. But I also spoke to a lot of different experts about the barriers that they faced in conducting and publishing their research, especially global south experts. And there are just so many systemic barriers to do with language, to do with funding, to do with unequal collaborations like power dynamics. I'm not going to go into all the details now. You can read my very lengthy analysis if you're interested. But off the back of that, I decided to try and make a bit more of an effort in my own writing to represent climate experts from the global south. And I was like, wow, all of these other journalists are doing a terrible job including global south scientists. I'm going to be the one to include them all in my work. And it turns out it's really difficult because if you are a global south climate expert and you don't get the chance to publish your work a lot because of all the systemic barriers, it means your online presence is not as good as I was like. And so if you're a journalist working to a tight timescale, it's really hard to find these people. And it's so easy just to default back to the experts that you know. So I found myself consistently defaulting back to Met Office experts who were great, but they tended to get older English men. And so my articles were just full of quotes by these older English men, which was not ideal. And so I teamed up with someone from the Reuters Oxford Climate Journalism Network. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. It recently shut down, which is very sad, but it was awesome. It was based here in Oxford. Teamed up with someone from them, made this database. Yes, okay. If you go to the Carbon Week website, you can find the database here. There are more than 1,000 experts on it. All of them have signed up themselves to be on this database. So it was their choice. We've got more than 100 different countries represented on it. A bunch of different areas of expertise are on there. And everyone who's on the database also got the chance to have media training. So we got one of the media trainers who does training for the IPCC, for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change experts. She came and specifically gave training to the people on this database, so they are trained. Obviously, I know a lot of you probably aren't journalists, but also you can use this to find peer reviewers for your papers, or if you're collaborators, or whatever it is. This is just a very cool resource. There's lots of awesome climate experts from the Global South, and I just think it's very cool. So that's why I'm sharing it. And yeah, it's been up and running for 2 years now. And we're constantly updating it. And every single expert who submits their details, on the Google form that we set up, I check myself, or me, or one of my colleagues checks. We manually have gone through every one of these 1,000 experts and made sure that they're all good and that the entries are all solid and whatever. So yeah, I think it's worth checking out. I would just spoken, as you can see. Yeah, still more men than women, which is something that I want to work on. But yeah, and people who want to join the database, find experts from the Global South, you want to join, with the form number to fill in. It's what yeah. So anyway, that I think is everything for me. Yeah. So if anyone has any questions, I can have to answer them. But yeah, thank you. Mm. I would argue that if the meaning is the same, then again, this is my personal conviction. I would argue if the meaning is the same, then there's nothing to. But definitely there are times when, for artistic reasons, I don't feel if you're writing something and you want the flow, you want to long sentence. Reasons I think that yeah, longer words can be useful, but if your purpose, I guess for me the purpose is communication, to impart an idea from my brain into someone else's brain. And for that, I think that wherever it's possible to go simpler, we should. There are different mediums though, literature and poetry and lots of other kind of artistic things where I think the choice of the word is a lot more the meaning of the word. But again, personal argument, it's if I'm just trying to get an idea from my brain into your brain, I'm just going to use simple words that make sense. I guess the AI, I mean, that's a whole other thing that we could talk about, but that's a whole thing. I don't think I really specific. I mean, I know what you think, if there's specific situations that you think it would be possible to use an cognitive word, or yeah, phrase, or I don't have to be, it's just my opinion, but yeah, absolutely. So the carbon reef audience tends to be more journalists and policymakers and scientists, like a slightly more educated audience. That means we don't start every article, for example, by explaining why climate change matters. We assume that if you're with us, you know that climate change matters. We assume you have a basic level of understanding, and we jump right into quite detailed, quite techy stuff. Like some of our most read articles are like explainers of specific modeling scenarios, for example. It's stuff that you're only going to come and find it if you already know that you want it. And I don't know many other outlets that would publish like 50,000 word articles. So definitely that's how we're like, yeah, we're not targeting a general public audience. But we do still try to make our content accessible, I would say, in a way that maybe journal articles don't. We still try to think about using nice images and making charts and graphics. This is something I didn't have time to show here, but we spend a lot of time working with our visuals team to make nice graphics, charts, and visualizations to show concepts more easily. Because the idea is that then you do have to understand how to read a chart to look at our stuff. Like it's not super simple in the way that maybe the Daily Mail might have a bar chart with like 3 lines on it, which is very easy to read. Like ours is still a bit complicated, but hopefully it will summarize a concept quite nicely in a way that maybe reading a journal paper would do. So it's I forgot to repeat the question. Okay. Okay, so we get our funding from the European Climate Foundation. That's it. That's the whole answer. European Climate Foundation. On how politics, the current political situation, kind of affecting climate journalism. So, okay, so when Carbon Brief was founded, like over a decade ago, we were a fact-checking organization. I say we, I wasn't with Carbon Brief yet, but they were a fact-checking organization. Like if a politician said something stupid, Carbon Brief could sweep in and correct them. And then over time, as the science of climate change became more accepted, Carbon Brief moved to a more explanatory, long-form journalism-y place. We are now unfortunately seeing that we're starting to have to move back again a bit more into this fact-checking, authoritative voice. These people are saying things that are wrong place, which is really sad. I mean, it's not the kind of journalism that I joined Carbon Brief to do. I like to do the in-depth explaining stuff, but like it's very important right now to have that rapid fire fact checking voice. And so I think one of the things that we try to do that I think is quite important that I think journalists and like trusted organizations can help with is pre-bunking. Like as I did, instead of waiting for the misinformation and then trying to debunk things, we try to get in ahead of time and pre-bunk things and like get the correct information into people's brains before the incorrect information can lodge in there first. Because I think it's kind of like whatever you hear first is probably the thing that's going to stick in your brain, and then that's the thing that has to be ousted. So if we can just get in there with the correct information first, then it's a lot harder for that misinformation to get in there. So I think that's the thing that I think there's also a space for lots of different types of communicators. There's a really good space, for example, for like climate YouTubers to get in there and get like a different audience. And like that's its audience, but you need lots of different communicators to people because people generally relate more to people who look like them and sound like them and like related. So we need lots of different people to relate to everybody. Um, and to like talk about the issues that are relevant to those people. So yeah. Writing a headline and how to balance actually engaging of it with nuance factualness of it. At one point, Carbon Brief almost prided ourselves on writing really boring headlines. Like we were genuinely proud of the fact that if you put all of the headlines from all different outlets who covered the same paper in a row, ours would be the most boring but the most factual headline. That was like a source of pride for us. Um, we definitely do try to veer more towards the factual side. So like that study that when I showed all of the headlines for the study earlier, and we have a contested headline. Not many other people put that, and we did it not because it's flashy and grabby, although maybe it is, but because we thought the fact that the study was contested was actually more important than the finding of the study. So like we, it's a very good question. The writing of headlines is like the last thing that usually happens, and it's the thing that usually there are the most opinions about, with people trying to balance, oh, we think that this phrase should be in it. And often it's a case of like I would say there are often times when we consider a headline and then decide, no, we can't write that, it's not quite accurate. And then once the study is out and everybody, all the other outlets have written their headlines, often someone else will have picked that headline, but we decided it's not accurate enough. So we definitely try to veer on the side of accurate. But I think we can do that because we know who our audience is. And I don't judge other outlets for writing things that are less accurate in a bid to get the audience in. Yeah, I guess there's no real easy answer to your question. It's this constant balancing act, and obviously we don't always get it right, but we try very hard to focus on the accurate side over the flashy side, and it's a very privileged position that we can do that by virtue to our audiences. Yes. Yeah. I think they're a really powerful communication tool. I mentioned a book by Sappho and O'Neill earlier, The Visual Life of Climate Change. She talks a lot about, I mean, the power of images, and she includes memes in that as a very powerful communication. Carbon Breed would not do that because it doesn't fit our brand, our voice. Like we don't. Humor is a really valuable tool. It's not one that Carbon Breed means I'm very having fierce content. But I will say that we are always trying to adapt and change and match the times. So we have actually started producing YouTube shorts quite recently. I think we've only done a couple, but that's a very new thing for us. And it's like, a journalist talking head talking about their article. And that is very new. That was a really big step for us and for the editors to try to start doing that. And that's because a lot of the research shows that people like to see people's faces, like people don't trust organizations as much, but they trust individuals, they trust faces. So we're trying to think in that way. I think memes would be a step too far. I mean, I guess like if I wanted to post a meme personally as Ayesha Tandon, I could certainly do that. I'm not sure I'm a meme person, but I guess then that's the difference between Ayesha Tandon in for carbon proof context and Ayesha Tandon in personal context. And that's also a very messy thing that we're trying to figure out at the moment. But I mean, I think if memes suit your brand, I think that's a great way to do it. It just has to fit the voice. And the carbon proof voice, I think, is a more authoritative and neutral and yeah, less humorous voice. So we wouldn't do that, but I think it's a really good form of communication, sure. Politically, on our political leaning, we try to be politically neutral. Obviously, everyone within Carbon Brief, like no one is a reform voter in Carbon Brief. Oh, no one's outed themselves as a reform voter in Carbon Brief. Like we all do have a sense of politics to share. We all believe in climate change, which in today's society does put us all a bit more left wing, I guess. But the organization, we do try to be very neutral. I mean, there is no such thing as neutrality, right? I mean, that concept, I believe that concept does not exist. But we try to be very neutral. We never publish comment pieces or opinion pieces. Everything that we write is backed up by statistics. We don't put our opinion, like our own vertical into anything. But by nature of the topics that we choose to cover, the people we choose to quote, you're not neutral, right? But we try to be as close to neutral as possible. But you also have to avoid that kind of we spoke to one climate scientist, so now let's speak to a climate denier, like false balance thing. Like